Today is the 25th of October, 2050. Today I told my children about rhinos. I told them about how the very land itself seemed to move when a herd of elephants traversed the horizon. We discussed our cousins, the great apes, the alpha gorilla, the family man who cared for his troop. We discussed dolphins, the aquatic acrobats, the jokers of the ocean, with an intelligence that rivaled that of a human. Gone. Gorillas, gone. Elephants, gone. Rhinos, long gone. When my children asked why humanity sat back, why we didn't do anything, I could have told them that we didn't have enough time to act. I could have told them that we tried our best, but that would be a lie. Instead, I told them that when I was their age, I was in love with the natural world. I was that child who created a home for ants in my bedroom and a sanctuary for snails in the kitchen, which went down incredibly well with my parents. To me, everything needed rescuing, and everything, of course, wanted to come and live in the house on the kitchen table. But the natural world was never just a hobby or passion for me. It was a necessity. I had such a deep respect, such a deep reverence for nature, that when I discovered not everyone shared this, it was less of a realization and more a complete transformation. I took it incredibly seriously. I became more isolated, more introverted, and more serious because I felt like the only young person in the world who had to carry such a burden of impending extinction and decimation. But today, it's 2050, and the only comfort I can provide my children is that I organized marches and protests and campaigns with the dire warnings ringing in my ears, spurring me on. I heard the conservation biologists warning of biodiversity collapse. I heard the climate scientists warning of deadly droughts and prolific storms. I heard the ecologists warning of the collapse of our rainforests, and marine biologists warning of islands of plastic waste, bigger than countries. And yet, humanity closed their ears to the ecologists and opened them instead to the economists. We strove for monetary wealth, forgetting that Native American saying that when the last tree is cut, the last fish is caught, and the last river is polluted. When to breathe the air is sickening, you will realize too late that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money. One positive, I suppose, is that we no longer worry about deforestation or plastic pollution or ocean acidification. After all, there are few trees left to cut down, few fish left to poison, few species left to threaten. We were so busy cutting down the tree of life that we didn't even realize we were on the highest branch and had the greatest distance to fall. And fall we have. But today is actually the 25th of October, 2019. We have frogs, larks, and catfish. We have forests and grasslands and mangroves, and that means we have hope. That means we have a chance to turn things around. A great amount of power is in our hands. All of us decide whether a forest is raised or left to stand, whether gorillas survive or go extinct, whether a river flows or not. Even the temperature of our planet is under our influence. That means that every single one of us has the ability to leave our signature on this planet, but we have to decide, do we want to leave a masterpiece or a wreckage? Earlier this year, I witnessed a glimpse into that wreckage, which will be the norm if we don't change. I was making a film about palm oil and the negative effects on species such as orangutans, and I was invited to meet Iman. She is the last Malaysian Sumatran rhino in the world, And this is Dr. Zainal, her keeper. He's been working on protecting the Malaysian rhino in Sumatra and Borneo for almost his whole working life. He was there in 2017 when Puntong had to be euthanized. He was there in May this year when Tam, the last male, died. And he will most likely be there when Iman breathes her last breath, which will be the last breath of a species. He's had front row seats to the 6th mass extinction, and right then so did I. Now, stories always speak louder than statistics, so I'm going to ask you to all please just close your eyes and just imagine that you stand as I stood in that spacious concrete barn where Iman has her breakfast, backing onto her large jungle reserve. You stare at this primitive, prehistoric creature who seems to have just trundled out of the Jurassic period. Her plaintive calls ring in your ears. Her skin is leather thick, her face topped by a firm horn, and her species over 20 million years old. She seems invincible, but somehow our species has managed to mangle her population down and down until today, when one Malaysian Sumatran rhino exists on Earth. And there you stand, looking to her eyes. The name Iman means faith. But in that moment, I didn't feel any faith in humanity. I felt a deep loss and a deep hopelessness. And I'm not the only one. I know so many young people who are absolutely terrified. We are terrified because of the dire warnings and stark reality of what our futures may hold, and we're terrified because many of the adults who we have trusted to hand us a safe and healthy planet are betraying that trust. That fear is manifesting in a new phenomenon called eco-anxiety. In a study done by Yale, 70% of the participants felt anxious about the climate and ecological crisis, and 51% felt completely helpless. Now, I realize that at this point in my talk, I may have made all of you feel helpless and despair as well. But fortunately, I haven't come just to warn of biodiversity collapse and mass extinction. I've come to tell you that action is the antidote to despair and the creator of hope. And if we want to feel hopeful, we must move away from our current position of dormancy where we're failing to act in the face of existential risk. I see two things our species can do that are commonly overlooked. The first, listening to youth-driven solutions. Studies have shown that when 3.5% of a population take a stand, that's when large-scale social change occurs. And since young people are one of the largest demographics in the world and have the greatest stake in the future of our planet, we cannot waste the creativity and innovation that this sector of society brings. The second thing, preserving and restoring nature on a colossal scale. Yes, we should invest in renewables, turn every car and every truck electric, and divest from fossil fuels. But as long as our planet's great forests are being slashed and burned, as long as coral reefs are being bleached, and as long as species are being driven to extinction, any chance of salvaging our future remains out of reach. If we don't stop waging war on the natural world, then nothing else will matter. But if we begin to restore great swathes of land, if we begin to restore forests, maintain peatlands and plant mangroves, we'll sequester carbon from the atmosphere and protect vital habitats. So the first thing was listening to youth-driven solutions, and the second was preserving and restoring nature on a colossal scale. Now, what if I told you that young people were raising money through lemonade stands and car boot sales to fund thousands of acres of rainforest? It sounds improbable and maybe even impossible, but that is exactly what we're doing. Earlier this year, I helped to set up Reserva Youth Land Trust, not knowing much about the successful business person lingo of NGOs or MPOs or 501Cs, but it seems to me, when passion and persistence prevail, almost anything is accomplishable, especially when the future of your species is at stake. You see, we don't have a choice because studies have shown that in order to prevent catastrophic runaway climate change and biodiversity loss in the next decade, we must have over 50% of land on Earth protected. Right now, we're just under 20%. But we are working on the first entirely youth-funded nature reserve in the Chocó rainforest in Ecuador. Every $3 that a child donates protects an area of rainforest the size of a classroom. And because this project has been driven by young people, I can now stand here and have the credibility to ask our leaders, why on earth are we putting planet over profit and morality over money? Why on earth can we young people see the necessity to pour everything we have into fighting these crises when many of our leaders only think of enriching their lives in the present at the cost of the quality of life of future generations? And in our reserve, there are many species, and on a recent expedition, scientists discovered species new to science, including mammals, frogs, and orchids. The reserve is also home to the critically endangered brown-headed spider monkey, one of the rarest primates in the world. There is also the plate-billed toucan, the two-toed sloth, the armadillo, the ocelot, the puma, the olinguito, only just discovered. But saving the Earth isn't going to be driven just by us. In fact, I know of an incredible device which sucks carbon out of the atmosphere, costs nothing, and builds itself. It is called a tree. And since I began speaking, around 1,500 acres of tropical rainforest have been cut down, and yet we spend millions of pounds on carbon sequestering machines out of the belief that it is only human invention which can save the planet. Up until now, we've seen ourselves almost as the authors of the story of planet Earth. But really, we are just one characters in the long and convoluted history and future of our home. If we end our chapter early, the story will continue. But it will continue without us in it. And because I say this, and because I stand on this stage, perhaps you think I have a silver bullet to solve this crisis. I don't. But I do know that the solution requires mass mobilization, and it requires everyone. The anthropologist Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world." But we don't need to change the world. We need to change ourselves, and that's even harder. So on behalf of my generation, I'm not asking you to support us. I'm asking you to join us. I'm asking you to be on the right side of history, and to not only watch the movement, but to participate in it. After all, this isn't just a job for my generation. This is a job for humanity. Thank you.